I never thought a simple garage sale would turn into one of the most satisfying cases I'd ever work on. But let me start from the beginning, on what seemed like just another peaceful Saturday morning in my new neighborhood. After 15 years of working long hours, dealing with cases that kept me up at night, and finally getting that promotion to detective chief, I had decided it was time for a change. I wanted a quieter life outside of work. You know, the kind of place where people actually knew their neighbors and kids rode bikes down the street without a care in the world. So I bought a house in Maple Ridge Estates, one of those suburbs where every lawn looks like it belongs in a magazine, and people wave at each other from their porches. Moving into a new place meant I had accumulated way too much stuff. Boxes of things I hadn't touched in years, furniture that didn't fit my new space, kitchen gadgets I'd bought on a whim and never used. My garage was packed to the ceiling, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. A garage sale, nothing fancy, just a simple way to clear out the clutter and maybe meet some neighbors in the process. I'm not the type to do things halfway, so I checked the homeowners association rules first. That's just how my mind works after years on the force. Always check the regulations, know your rights, follow the procedures. The HOA handbook was pretty clear. Garage sales were allowed on weekends between 8 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. You needed to keep your signs at a reasonable size, not block the sidewalks, and clean everything up by the end of the day. Simple enough. I could work with that. For 3 weeks, I sorted through my belongings. Old furniture that was still in decent shape. Books I'd read twice and would never open again. Dishes and decorations that just didn't match my style anymore. I priced everything fairly and made sure to organize it all neatly. By Friday evening, I had everything ready to go. My driveway would transform into a makeshift store first thing Saturday morning. I woke up early that Saturday, feeling pretty good about the whole thing. The weather was perfect. Not too hot, not too cold, with just enough of a breeze to make it comfortable. I set up my tables, arranged everything by category, and put out my signs exactly as the rules specified. By 7:45, I was ready for business. At 8 on the dot, I officially opened for customers. The first people to stop by were an older couple from down the street. They were sweet, telling me all about how they'd lived in the neighborhood for 20 years and loved seeing new families move in. They bought a lamp and a set of coffee mugs, and we chatted about the best places to eat nearby and which grocery store had the freshest produce. It felt nice, normal, exactly what I'd been looking for when I moved here. More neighbors started showing up. A young dad bought some tools for his garage. A teenager was thrilled to find a vintage record player I'd been holding on to since college. 2 women from the next street over browsed through my books and ended up buying almost the entire box. Everyone was friendly, asking questions about where I'd moved from and what I did for work. I kept my answers vague, just said I worked for the city and left it at that. People don't always relax when they find out you're in law enforcement, and I wanted to enjoy the casual atmosphere. By 9:30, I'd already made a couple $100 and was genuinely enjoying myself. This was so different from my usual Saturday mornings, which typically involved catching up on case files or dealing with some crisis that couldn't wait until Monday. Here, the biggest decision was whether to sell a side table for $15 or $20. It was refreshing. Around 10 o'clock, things changed. I noticed a silver Mercedes driving slowly down the street, like whoever was inside was inspecting every house. The car came to a stop in front of my driveway, but not in a normal way. It lurched onto the curb, half on the street and half blocking the sidewalk. The engine shut off, and out stepped a woman who looked like she was dressed for a country club brunch, not a casual Saturday in the suburbs. She wore expensive athletic wear, the kind that probably cost more than my entire garage sale inventory. Designer sunglasses, perfectly styled hair, and she carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. From the moment she stepped out of that car, her body language screamed authority and displeasure. She didn't walk toward my garage sale. She marched. I was helping a customer at the time, a nice lady who was asking about a bookshelf, when this woman inserted herself right into our conversation. She didn't say hello, didn't introduce herself at first, just started talking like she owned the place. "Excuse me, but I need to speak with you immediately about this unauthorized activity." I turned to look at her, keeping my expression neutral. Years of dealing with difficult people had taught me not to react right away. The customer I'd been helping looked uncomfortable and quickly mumbled something about coming back later. She practically ran to her car. That should have been my first warning sign about what I was dealing with. "I'm sorry, is there a problem?" I asked, keeping my voice polite but firm. "There most certainly is a problem," she said, looking at me over her sunglasses like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "I'm Patricia Drummond, president of the Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, and you are in violation of multiple community standards." I felt my jaw tighten slightly, but I maintained my calm. This wasn't my first time dealing with someone on a power trip. I checked the HOA rules before setting up today. Garage sales are permitted on weekends between 8 and 4. Everything here complies with the guidelines. She let out this laugh that wasn't really a laugh, more like a scoff. "Clearly you didn't read them carefully enough. Your signage is oversized and garish. Your tables are extending past the acceptable boundary of your property, and the traffic you're generating is disrupting the peaceful nature of our community." I glanced at my signs. They were standard poster board, nothing excessive. My tables were completely within my driveway, nowhere near the property line. And traffic? A few neighbors stopping by was hardly a disruption. But I could see in her eyes that facts weren't going to matter here. She'd already made up her mind before she even got out of her car. "I have the handbook on my phone," I offered, pulling it out. "I can show you the exact specifications I followed." She waved her hand dismissively like I was wasting her precious time. "I don't need to see your phone. I wrote those guidelines. I know what they say, and I know a violation when I see one." Then she started walking around my driveway like she was conducting a crime scene investigation, taking photos with her phone from every angle, making exaggerated notes on her clipboard, measuring things with a tape measure she produced from her designer bag. She got down on her knees to photograph the placement of my tables, stood back to capture wide shots of my setup, and even took pictures of the cars parked on the street belonging to customers who were browsing. A couple who had been looking at some kitchen items quietly left without buying anything. Another neighbor who'd been walking over turned around and went back to his house. The atmosphere had completely changed. What had been a friendly, relaxed morning suddenly felt tense and uncomfortable. Patricia spent a good 15 minutes circling my driveway, documenting every perceived infraction with the dedication of someone building a legal case. When she finally finished, she walked right up to me, standing just a bit too close, invading my personal space in a way that was clearly intentional. "You can expect a formal complaint filed with the HOA by end of business Monday," she announced, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "The fine for multiple violations will be $500, payable within 10 days of notification. And if you don't remove all of this immediately, the fines will continue to accumulate daily. $500 for a garage sale that violated no actual rules." I could feel the anger building inside me, but I kept it controlled. Getting emotional wouldn't help. Instead, I did what I do best. I watched her, studied her, noted every detail of her behavior, her words, her tactics. "I'll be expecting your complaint," I said calmly, "and I'll be responding through proper channels." She smiled then, and it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who thought they'd already won. "You're new here, so let me give you some advice. In Maple Ridge Estates, we maintain certain standards. People who don't comply tend to find life here very difficult. I suggest you learn to follow the rules." With that, she turned on her heel and walked back to her Mercedes, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a trophy. She drove off slowly, deliberately, probably already planning her next move. I stood there in my driveway, surrounded by the remnants of my garage sale, and something clicked in my mind. This wasn't about rules or community standards. This was about power and control. And my instincts, honed by 15 years of investigating criminals, told me that Patricia Drummond was hiding something much bigger than a vendetta against garage sales. The rest of my garage sale was quiet. A few brave neighbors trickled back, and more than one of them pulled me aside to whisper warnings about Patricia. Their stories all had the same theme: complaints, fines, threats, and a neighborhood living in fear of their own HOA president. By 4 o'clock, as I packed up my remaining items, I'd made a decision. Patricia had picked the wrong person to intimidate. She just didn't know it yet. Sunday morning, I woke up thinking about Patricia and her threats. Most people would probably have been worried, maybe even scared about that $500 fine. But I wasn't most people. 15 years of dealing with criminals, liars, and people who thought they were above the law had given me a pretty good radar for when something didn't add up. And everything about Patricia's behavior the day before was setting off alarm bells in my head. I made myself some coffee and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop. The HOA handbook was my first stop. I read through every single page, not just skimming like most people do, but really reading, taking notes, cross-referencing sections, looking for loopholes, contradictions, anything that might explain Patricia's behavior or give me leverage. What I found was interesting. The rules about garage sales were crystal clear. There was absolutely nothing in the handbook that I had violated. Not one single thing. The sign size requirements? Mine were well within limits. Property boundaries? I hadn't crossed them. Duration and timing? Perfect compliance. Patricia had essentially made up violations that didn't exist. But it was another section that really caught my attention. The part about HOA board procedures and financial accountability. According to the handbook, all fines collected had to be documented in quarterly reports available to any homeowner upon request. The board was required to hold monthly meetings with published minutes, and any fine over $200 had to be approved by a majority vote of the board, not just the president alone. I sat back in my chair thinking. Patricia had threatened me with a $500 fine on the spot. No discussion, no board vote. That wasn't just aggressive, it was against the HOA's own rules. Either she didn't know her own guidelines, which seemed unlikely for someone who claimed to have written them, or she was used to operating outside the rules entirely. My detective instincts were fully engaged now. This wasn't about my garage sale anymore. This was about a pattern of behavior. I needed more information, and I knew exactly where to get it. From the people who'd been living in Patricia's shadow for years. I started with the older couple who'd bought the lamp from me on Saturday morning. I knocked on their door that afternoon, carrying a plate of cookies I'd baked as a thank you for being my first customers. They seemed surprised but invited me in immediately. We sat in their living room, and after some small talk, I gently steered the conversation toward the HOA. The change in their demeanor was instant. The husband's smile faded. The wife's hand started fidgeting with her teacup. They exchanged a look that told me everything I needed to know before they even started talking. "We've lived here for 22 years, the husband said quietly. This used to be such a wonderful neighborhood. Everyone looked out for each other. People had block parties and holiday gatherings. Then Patricia became HOA president 3 years ago, and everything changed." His wife nodded, her expression sad. "She filed a complaint against us last year. We were having an estate sale to get rid of my mother's things after she passed. We followed all the rules just like you did, but Patricia showed up and demanded we shut it down. Said we were violating noise ordinances even though it was the middle of the afternoon and nobody was making any noise." "How much was the fine?" I asked, though I had a feeling I already knew the answer. $750, the husband said, his voice bitter. "We couldn't afford to fight it. We're on a fixed income, so we paid it, directly to an account number Patricia gave us. She said it was easier than going through the official HOA channels. That made my ears perk up." "You paid her directly?" "Not through the HOA's regular system." They both nodded. The wife pulled out a folder from a drawer in their coffee table. Inside were copies of checks, emails, and letters, all the documentation of their fine. And sure enough, the account number on the payment receipt didn't match the official HOA account listed on their quarterly statements. I asked if I could take photos of the documents, and they agreed immediately. They seemed relieved to finally tell someone what had happened. As I was leaving, the husband grabbed my arm gently. "Be careful with Patricia," he warned. "She's vindictive. People who stand up to her end up with even more complaints filed against them. Code violations, noise complaints, you name it. She makes their lives miserable until they either pay up or move out." Over the next few days, I talked to 7 other neighbors. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle I was building. A young mother told me about being fined for her children's chalk drawings on their own driveway. Patricia had called it vandalism and demanded $300. A middle-aged guy 3 houses down had been cited for his mailbox being the wrong shade of black. Another family had been fined for parking their car on the street overnight, even though there was no rule against it. The pattern was clear and disturbing. Patricia targeted people who seemed vulnerable, new residents who didn't know the rules well enough to fight back, elderly homeowners who couldn't afford legal battles, young families stretched thin financially, anyone who looked like they might just pay the fine rather than cause trouble. But what really got my attention was the money trail. Every single person I talked to had paid their fines the same way, to an account number Patricia provided. None of them had received official receipts from the HOA. None of the fines appeared in the quarterly financial reports that were supposed to be available to residents. I requested the last 3 years of HOA financial records through the proper channels, citing the section in the handbook that said any homeowner could access them. It took 4 days and 2 follow-up emails before I received a response. The records arrived in my email as PDF files, and I spent an entire evening going through them with the same attention to detail I used on my biggest cases at work. The numbers didn't add up. According to the official records, the HOA had collected about $19,000 in fines over 3 years. Reasonable for a neighborhood this size, and the money had been spent on legitimate things like landscaping, street repairs, and community events. Nothing suspicious there. But based on my conversations with neighbors and the documentation they'd shared with me, I'd already identified over $47,000 in fines that Patricia had collected during that same period. $28,000 that had seemingly vanished into thin air, money that had been paid by residents but never showed up in the official HOA accounts. I created a spreadsheet, because that's what you do when you're investigating financial crimes. Names, dates, amounts, violation claims, and payment information. I noted which fines appeared in the official records and which ones didn't. The pattern was striking. Small fines under $100 usually made it into the official records, but anything over $200? Those seemed to disappear into Patricia's personal collection system. Wednesday evening, I got a certified letter in my mail. It was from the HOA, or more specifically from Patricia, the formal complaint she'd promised. I opened it at my kitchen counter, reading through her detailed list of supposed violations from my garage sale. The letter was 3 pages long and completely ridiculous. She'd included photos, but they were deliberately misleading. Shots taken from weird angles to make my setup look more intrusive than it was, measurements that were clearly wrong. Even a complaint about noise levels, claiming that my garage sale had created a disturbance, when the loudest sound all day had been her own voice berating me. The fine was listed as $500 payable within 10 days. The letter included instructions for payment, including, of course, an account number that I was supposed to wire the money to. An account number that didn't match the official HOA account I'd seen in the financial records. At the bottom of the letter was a veiled threat. If I didn't pay within the specified time frame, the fine would increase by $50 per day. Additionally, the letter stated that failure to comply could result in a lien being placed on my property and potential legal action. I read the letter 3 times, photographed every page, and filed it carefully in a folder I'd started specifically for this case, because that's what this had become in my mind. A case, and Patricia had just given me more evidence of her pattern of behavior. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing through everything I'd learned. This wasn't just about one power-hungry HOA president making life difficult for her neighbors. This was systematic fraud. Patricia had been running a scheme for at least 3 years, possibly longer. She'd been collecting money from residents under the guise of official HOA fines, but pocketing the cash for herself. The beauty of her scheme was in its simplicity. She targeted people who wouldn't fight back. She kept the fines high enough to be significant money for her, but low enough that most people would just pay rather than hire a lawyer or make waves in their own neighborhood. She'd created an atmosphere of fear, where nobody wanted to challenge her authority. I thought about all the neighbors I'd talked to. The elderly couple on a fixed income who'd paid $750, the young mother who'd scraped together $300 she couldn't afford, the families who'd been forced to make expensive changes to their homes based on Patricia's fabricated violations, all of them too scared or too tired to fight back. By Thursday morning, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to pay that fine. I wasn't going to let Patricia intimidate me into silence, and I definitely wasn't going to let her continue victimizing my neighbors. But I needed to be smart about this. Going in guns blazing wouldn't work. Patricia had been operating this scheme for years. She was careful, organized, and had probably covered her tracks well. I needed to build an airtight case, document everything, gather witness statements, trace the money. And most importantly, I needed to do it all as a concerned resident, not as a detective chief. Because once I pulled that card, there would be no going back. Friday afternoon, I sent an email to every address on the HOA contact list, which was published on the neighborhood website. The subject line was simple: request for special HOA meeting. In the email, I cited the section of the bylaws that allowed any resident to call for a special meeting if they gathered signatures from 15% of the homeowners. I didn't mention Patricia by name. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I simply stated that there were concerns about HOA financial procedures and fine assessment processes that needed to be addressed by the full community. I included a petition that people could sign electronically. Within 24 hours, I had signatures from 42 homeowners. Way more than the required 15%. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had problems with how Patricia was running things. People were scared, but they were also fed up. They just needed someone to take the first step, and I'd given them that opportunity. Patricia tried to block the meeting. She sent out an email claiming it was unnecessary and that all procedures were being followed correctly. But the bylaws were clear. Once I had the required signatures, the meeting had to happen within 14 days. She had no choice. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community center, and I had a feeling it was going to be a night that Patricia would never forget. The days leading up to the Tuesday meeting felt like the calm before a storm. I spent every spare moment preparing, organizing my evidence, and talking to more neighbors who'd been victims of Patricia's schemes. Each conversation revealed another layer of her operation, and I was building a case that would have made any prosecutor proud. Monday morning, I received another letter from Patricia. This one wasn't certified, just dropped in my mailbox. The tone was different from the official complaint. More personal, more threatening. She reminded me that my fine was now up to $600 with the daily penalties. She also mentioned that she'd noticed I'd been stirring up trouble in the neighborhood and suggested that new residents who couldn't follow simple rules might be happier living elsewhere. It was a mistake on her part. That letter showed her hand. She was worried. The fact that she'd personally delivered it instead of using official channels told me she was starting to feel the pressure. Good. I wanted her uncomfortable. Uncomfortable people make mistakes. I'd been doing this job long enough to know that the key to taking down someone like Patricia wasn't just having evidence. It was about timing and presentation. I needed to reveal everything at once in front of witnesses, in a way that she couldn't spin or explain away. The community meeting was perfect for that. Tuesday evening arrived, and I got to the community center 30 minutes early. I wanted to set up properly, make sure I had everything I needed. I brought my laptop, a projector I'd borrowed from work, and 3 folders stuffed with documentation. I'd also prepared a simple presentation, nothing fancy, just clear facts and numbers that anyone could understand. People started trickling in around 6:45. The meeting was scheduled for 7, but by 6:50 the room was already half full. I recognized most of the faces from my conversations over the past week. The elderly couple sat in the front row, giving me encouraging nods. The young mother with the chalk drawing complaint came in with her husband. Others I'd talked to found seats scattered throughout the room, but there were also people I hadn't spoken to yet. Curious neighbors who'd heard something was happening and wanted to see what all the fuss was about. By 7 o'clock, every seat was taken and people were standing along the walls. I counted at least 60 residents, maybe more. In a neighborhood of about 90 households, that was an impressive turnout. Patricia arrived at 7 sharp, flanked by the other 2 board members. She looked confident, almost amused, like this whole thing was beneath her, but she'd humor us anyway. She wore a business suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was flawless. She carried that same clipboard like a shield. She walked to the front of the room like she owned it, barely glancing at me as I stood off to the side with my materials. The other board members looked uncomfortable. I'd learned their names during my investigation. One was a retired accountant named Tom, who'd only been on the board for 6 months. The other was a woman named Linda, who worked as a teacher and had been on the board for 2 years. From what I'd heard, they were both decent people who'd been largely kept in the dark about Patricia's activities. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her knuckles on the table. "I understand that some concerns have been raised about HOA procedures," she began, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm sure we can address these concerns quickly and get everyone back to their evening plans. Now, who called for this meeting?" I raised my hand and stepped forward. I did. She looked at me then. "Are you sure we can address these concerns quickly and get everyone back to their evening plans?" Now, who called for this meeting? I raised my hand and stepped forward. I did. She looked at me then. "Are you sure we can address these concerns quickly and get everyone back to their evening plans?" really looked at me, and I saw a flash of anger cross her face before she smoothed it away. Ah, yes, our newest resident. The one with the problematic garage sale. I'm not sure you have enough experience with our community to be calling special meetings, but since you've gathered the required signatures, here we are. What exactly are your concerns? I walked to the front of the room, connecting my laptop to the projector. My concerns are about financial irregularities and improper fine assessment procedures. I believe the community has a right to know how HOA funds are being collected and managed. Patricia laughed, but it sounded forced. Our financial records are completely transparent and available to any resident. I'm not sure what you think you found, but I can assure you everything is in order. That's interesting, I said, pulling up my first slide, because I requested the official financial records, and they show that over the past 3 years, the HOA has collected approximately $19,000 in fines from residents. Is that correct? Tom, the retired accountant, nodded. Yes, that sounds about right based on our quarterly reports. I clicked to the next slide. Then can you explain why I've documented over $47,000 in fines that were collected from residents during that same time period? Fines that don't appear anywhere in the official records? The room went completely silent. Patricia's confident expression flickered. That's absurd. Where are you getting these numbers? From your victims, I said simply and clicked to the next slide. It showed a table with dates, amounts, and the violations Patricia had claimed. I'd redacted the names to protect privacy, but the numbers were all there. Case 1. $750 fine for an estate sale paid directly to a personal account. Case 2. $300 fine for chalk drawings on a private driveway. Case 3. $500 for a mailbox color violation. I went through 10 examples, each more ridiculous than the last. With each one, I could see people in the audience nodding, recognizing their own experiences or stories they'd heard from neighbors. Patricia's face was getting redder. This is slander, she snapped. You can't prove any of this. I clicked to another slide showing copies of the payment receipts with account numbers highlighted. Actually, I can. 23 residents have provided me with documentation of fines they paid, all to the same account number, an account that doesn't match the official HOA banking information on file with the county. Tom leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Patricia, that's not our HOA account number. It's a secondary account, Patricia said quickly. For administrative purposes. There's no mention of a secondary account in any of our financial records, Tom replied, and I could hear the concern in his voice. I review the quarterly reports personally. There's only one account listed. Linda, the teacher, was looking at Patricia with growing horror. How long has this secondary account existed? Patricia stood up abruptly. I don't have to answer to these baseless accusations. This meeting is over. Actually, it's not, I said calmly. According to the bylaws, once a special meeting is called and convened, it can only be adjourned by a majority vote of the attending homeowners. We're not done yet. I could see Patricia calculating her options. She looked around the room, seeing the angry faces, the shocked expressions, the people who were starting to understand what had been happening in their neighborhood for years. She sat back down slowly, her jaw clenched tight. Let's talk about the fine procedures, I continued. According to the HOA handbook, any fine over $200 must be approved by a majority vote of the board. Patricia, did you bring any of these fines to a board vote? She didn't answer. Tom and Linda were both staring at her now. I'll take that as a no, I said. Which means every single fine over $200 that you assessed was against the HOA's own rules. That includes the $500 fine you tried to impose on me for my garage sale. I pulled out the letter she'd sent me and held it up. This letter threatens me with a fine that increases daily. It instructs me to pay to an account number that isn't the official HOA account, and it includes veiled threats about placing a lien on my property, all for violations that don't actually exist according to the HOA handbook. The audience was getting restless now. People were muttering to each other, some angrily, some in disbelief. A man in the back stood up. She did the same thing to me, threatened a lien if I didn't pay for a fence violation. I paid $350 2 years ago. She fined me for having my trash cans visible from the street. Another woman called out, $400. More people started sharing their stories. The room erupted into overlapping conversations, everyone suddenly realizing they weren't alone. Patricia had been operating in the shadows, keeping everyone isolated and scared. But now in this room, with everyone together, the truth was coming out, and there was no way to stop it. I let it go on for a few minutes before raising my hand for quiet. I have documentation here of over 40 cases where residents were charged improper fines. Based on the account numbers provided for payment and the fact that none of this money appears in official records, it's clear that these funds were diverted to personal accounts rather than HOA accounts. Patricia finally found her voice. This is a witch hunt. You've been here for 2 weeks and you think you can come in here and accuse me of crimes? I've served this community for 3 years. I've maintained property values and upheld our standards. By stealing from your neighbors? The elderly man from the front row stood up, his voice shaking with anger. My wife and I are on a fixed income. We paid you $750 we couldn't afford because you said we had to. And now we find out you were just pocketing the money? Patricia tried to respond, but the room was turning against her completely. Tom had pulled out his phone and was frantically typing. Linda had her head in her hands. The other residents were on their feet, some shouting questions, others demanding answers. I let the chaos continue for another minute, then spoke loudly enough to be heard over the noise. I think it's clear that we need a full investigation into HOA finances. I propose that we vote to suspend Patricia's authority as HOA president, pending an independent audit. Seconded, Tom said immediately, and Linda nodded her agreement. Patricia looked around the room, finally understanding that she'd lost control completely. You can't do this. I'll fight this. I'll sue every one of you. You're welcome to try, I said quietly. But I should probably mention something I haven't told anyone in this neighborhood yet. The room went quiet again, everyone looking at me. Patricia's eyes narrowed suspiciously. I'm not just a concerned homeowner, I continued. I'm a detective chief with the Metro Police Department. I've spent 15 years investigating fraud cases, and everything I've found over the past week is enough to warrant a criminal investigation, not just an HOA audit. You could have heard a pin drop. Patricia's face went from red to white in seconds. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The other board members looked shocked. The audience stared at me with a mixture of surprise and relief. Patricia finally found her voice. This is entrapment. You can't use your position to target me. I didn't use my position at all, I corrected her. I investigated as a private citizen and homeowner. Everything I've found is information that was available to any resident who bothered to look. The difference is, I knew what to look for. But now that I've found evidence of potential criminal activity, I have an obligation to report it to the appropriate authorities. Patricia grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I'm leaving, you'll be hearing from my lawyer. That's your right, I called after her. But I should let you know that I've already compiled a full report with all the evidence I've gathered. It'll be on the district attorney's desk first thing tomorrow morning. She stopped at the door, her hand on the handle, shoulders rigid. For a moment I thought she might turn around and say something, but she just pushed through the door and disappeared into the parking lot. Through the window I watched her practically run to her Mercedes and speed away. The meeting continued for another hour after that. We voted unanimously to suspend Patricia and request an independent audit. Tom agreed to take over as interim president. Linda volunteered to contact the residents who'd paid improper fines to start documenting everything officially, and I promised to walk them through the process of reporting financial crimes to the proper authorities. As people filed out of the community center that night, many of them stopped to thank me. Some had tears in their eyes. Others just shook my hand firmly, relief written all over their faces. The young mother hugged me, whispering that she'd felt so helpless before but now finally had hope. Driving home that night, I felt good. This was why I'd become a detective in the first place, not for the big headlines or the dramatic arrests. For moments like this when regular people who'd been victimized finally got justice. Patricia had picked the wrong person to target with her garage sale complaint. But in doing so, she'd given me the opportunity to protect an entire community. The fight wasn't over yet. I knew there would be more to come, but the hardest part was done. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back. Wednesday morning, I woke up knowing that the easy part was over, exposing Patricia in front of The community had been satisfying, sure, but now came the real work. Building a criminal case that would actually hold up in court was a completely different challenge than proving something to angry neighbors at a community meeting. I kept my promise and drove downtown to the district attorney's office first thing that morning. I'd worked with these people for years, knew most of them by name. But I wanted to handle this the right way, so I made an appointment through official channels and brought every piece of documentation I'd gathered as a private citizen, not as a detective. The assistant district attorney assigned to financial crimes was a sharp woman in her early 40s named Rebecca. We'd worked together on an embezzlement case 2 years ago, and she had a reputation for being thorough and fair. When I walked into her office carrying 3 thick folders, she raised an eyebrow. "I heard you moved to the suburbs," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Figured you'd be enjoying the peace and quiet. What brings you here with what looks like a whole lot of paperwork?" I sat down and slid the folders across her desk. "Turns out, my HOA president has been running a fraud scheme for at least 3 years. I stumbled into it because she tried to find me for a garage sale, and my curiosity got the better of me." Rebecca opened the first folder and started flipping through the pages. Her expression shifted from casual interest to focused attention as she read. "Walk me through this," she said, pulling out a legal pad. I spent the next hour laying out everything I'd found. The pattern of targeting vulnerable residents, the fabricated violations, the personal account that wasn't connected to the official HOA finances, the documented cases of fines that had been collected but never recorded, the threats and intimidation tactics. Rebecca took notes steadily, occasionally stopping me to ask clarifying questions. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and let out a low whistle. "This is pretty clear-cut. You've done most of my job for me already. How much are we talking total? Based on what I've documented, at least $28,000 over 3 years. But I only talked to about a quarter of the neighborhood. The actual number could be much higher." Rebecca tapped her pen against her notepad. "And you gathered all this as a private citizen? No use of department resources, no access to restricted databases? Nothing but publicly available information and voluntary statements from victims. I was very careful about that. The last thing I wanted was for this to get thrown out on a technicality." "Good," she nodded approvingly. "Because you know defense attorneys would jump all over any hint of official overreach. This way, you're just a concerned homeowner who happens to have investigative skills." She closed the folders and stacked them neatly. "I'll need to verify everything independently, interview the victims myself, and get subpoenas for the financial records. But based on what you've shown me, I think we have enough for multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and possibly extortion." "How long before anything happens?" I asked. "Give me 2 weeks to build the case properly. I'll need to coordinate with the fraud unit, get a forensic accountant to trace the money trail, and make sure we have everything airtight. People like Patricia tend to hire expensive lawyers, so I want to be prepared." I left her office feeling cautiously optimistic. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but at least they were turning. The neighborhood, meanwhile, was in an uproar. Word had spread fast about what had happened at the meeting. By Wednesday afternoon, my phone was ringing constantly with neighbors wanting to share their stories or ask what they should do. I referred everyone to Tom, the interim president, and to Rebecca's office for official statements. Thursday morning, I got a call from Tom asking if I could meet him at his house. When I arrived, he looked stressed, sitting at his kitchen table with his laptop open and papers spread everywhere. "I've been going through the HOA records more carefully," he said, rubbing his eyes. "It's worse than we thought. Patricia wasn't just collecting fake fines. She was also inflating expenses and billing the HOA for services that were never performed." He turned his laptop around to show me. "Look at this. Last spring, we supposedly paid $12,000 for neighborhood landscaping improvements. But I drove around yesterday, and I can't find any evidence of $12,000 worth of work. Maybe $3,000 at most." I leaned in to look at the invoices. "Do you have contact information for this landscaping company?" "That's the thing," Tom said. I called them. "They have no record of working in our neighborhood at all last year. The invoice is completely fake." We spent the next 2 hours going through expense reports. Tom had an accountant's eye for detail, and he was finding discrepancies everywhere. Fake invoices for maintenance work, inflated charges for community events that never happened. Even billing for legal services from a law firm that Tom discovered didn't exist when he tried to look them up. "She's been stealing from us in every way possible," Tom said, his voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "The fines were just part of it. She was embezzling from the actual HOA budget, too." I photographed all of his findings and sent them directly to Rebecca. This was adding tens of thousands more dollars to Patricia's theft. What had started as a garage sale complaint had uncovered a full-scale financial crime operation. Friday afternoon, something unexpected happened. I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a man's voice said, "Is this the detective who's investigating Patricia Drummond?" "Who's asking?" "My name is Michael. I used to be on the HOA board 2 years ago. I resigned suddenly, and I think you should know why." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near the neighborhood. Michael turned out to be a guy in his mid-30s, a software engineer who looked nervous and tired. We sat in a corner booth, and he ordered a coffee he barely touched. "I should have come forward sooner," he started, "but I was scared, and I convinced myself it wasn't my problem anymore. When I heard what happened at the meeting this week, I knew I couldn't stay quiet." "What do you know about Patricia?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "I joined the HOA board because I wanted to help the community." Patricia was already president, had been for about a year at that point. At first everything seemed normal, but then I started noticing things. Residents would mention paying fines I'd never heard about, expenses that didn't match up with what I remembered approving. When I asked Patricia about it, she got defensive and said I was overstepping my role. "Did you investigate?" "I tried," Michael said. "I started asking for detailed financial records, wanted to see bank statements, invoices, everything. Patricia blocked me at every turn, said I didn't have the authority, that only the president had access to certain accounts for security reasons. But that didn't make sense. Board members are supposed to have financial oversight. What happened then?" Michael looked down at his untouched coffee. "She threatened me, told me that if I kept pushing, she'd file complaints against my house, said she had photos of code violations, property line issues, things that could cost me thousands of dollars to fix. I have 2 kids and a mortgage. I couldn't afford a fight with the HOA, even though I was on the board myself. So I resigned and kept my mouth shut." "Did you document any of this?" "Some of it." He pulled out his phone. "I have emails where I requested financial information and she refused. Text messages where she made veiled threats. I kept them just in case, but I never thought I'd actually use them. I felt like a coward." "You weren't a coward," I said firmly. "She's a professional at intimidation. She knows exactly which pressure points to push. But you coming forward now, that takes courage. These communications could be important evidence." I took his contact information and sent it to Rebecca immediately. Michael's testimony would show that Patricia's behavior went back even further, and that she'd actively covered up her crimes by threatening board members who got too curious. Saturday morning, the independent auditor arrived to examine the HOA's financial records. The neighborhood had voted to hire a forensic accounting firm, and they were taking the job seriously. 2 accountants spent the entire weekend in the community center, going through years of documents, bank statements, and receipts. Sunday evening, I got a call from Tom. "You need to hear this," he said, his voice tight. "The auditors just gave me their preliminary findings. It's catastrophic." I drove over to the community center. The auditors, a man and woman in their 50s, had created a detailed presentation on a whiteboard. The numbers were staggering. "Based on our analysis," the female auditor explained, "we've identified approximately $67,000 in fraudulent fines collected over 3.5 years. Additionally, there's another $43,000 in fake expenses and inflated invoices. Total estimated theft is around $110,000. Tom looked sick. "How did she hide this for so long?" "She controlled all the information," the male auditor said. "She was the only one with access to certain accounts. She created the financial reports that went to the board and residents so she could show you whatever she wanted. The real records tell a very different story. They'd traced the money flow meticulously. Patricia had set up multiple personal accounts. Some fines went to one account, some to another. The fake invoices were paid to shell companies that she'd created, which then transferred the money right back to her personal accounts. It was sophisticated enough to avoid casual scrutiny, but obvious once someone actually looked closely. I called Rebecca immediately and arranged for her to meet with the auditors Monday morning. This was the final piece of evidence we needed. The forensic accounting would be crucial in court. Monday at work was surreal. I was trying to focus on my actual cases, but my mind kept drifting back to the HOA situation. Around 2 in the afternoon, Rebecca called. "We're moving forward," she said. "I've presented everything to a grand jury and they've issued an indictment. Fraud, embezzlement, extortion, and theft by deception. Multiple counts. The warrant for Patricia's arrest will be executed tomorrow morning." My heart rate picked up. "Do you need me there?" "Actually, yes. I'd like you to be present when we bring her in. You're the complainant and the primary witness. Plus, given your position, I think it sends a message that nobody is above the law, not even someone who thinks they run their neighborhood like a personal kingdom." Tuesday morning, I met Rebecca and 2 uniformed officers at Patricia's house. It was a large place, expensive looking, in one of the nicer parts of our neighborhood. The kind of house that should have been paid for with honest work, not stolen money. Rebecca rang the doorbell. We waited. After a minute, Patricia opened the door. She was in a bathrobe, her hair uncombed, looking nothing like the polished, intimidating figure from the community meeting. When she saw me standing there with the police, her face crumbled. "Patricia Drummond," Rebecca said formally. "I'm Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Chen. I have a warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, extortion, and theft. You have the right to remain silent." As Rebecca read her rights, Patricia just stared at me. Not angry, not defiant, just defeated. She knew it was over. The officers cuffed her gently and led her to their patrol car. Neighbors were starting to come out of their houses, watching. Some looked satisfied. Others just looked sad that it had come to this. Patricia sat in the back of the police car, and just before they drove away, she looked at me through the window. I didn't feel triumphant or vindictive. I just felt like I'd done my job. Protected people who needed protecting. Made sure someone who'd abused their power faced consequences. As the patrol car pulled away, Tom walked up next to me. "It's really over, isn't it?" "The arrest is just the beginning," I said. "There'll be a trial, probably a plea deal. Restitution for the victims. It'll take time, but yeah. Her reign over this neighborhood is definitely over." He shook his head in disbelief. "All because you had a garage sale." I smiled slightly. "All because she tried to intimidate the wrong person. If she just left me alone, she might have kept getting away with it." "Thank you," Tom said simply. "Really, you didn't have to do any of this." "Yes, I did," I replied. "It's who I am. Badge or no badge, I can't ignore injustice when I see it, especially not in my own neighborhood." We stood there for a moment, watching the patrol car disappear around the corner. The neighborhood felt different already. Lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. There was still work to do, people to help, money to recover. But the hardest part was behind us. Patricia had made a lot of mistakes, but her biggest one was thinking that her position gave her immunity. She forgot that eventually, everyone faces consequences for their actions. And in her case, those consequences were just getting started. The weeks following Patricia's arrest felt like watching a neighborhood wake up from a long nightmare. At first, there was this strange mix of emotions everywhere. Relief, definitely, but also anger, sadness, and for some people, a weird kind of guilt that they hadn't spoken up sooner. Patricia made bail within 24 hours, but she didn't come back to the neighborhood. Word got around that she'd moved in with her sister across town. Her house sat empty, a for sale sign appearing in the yard within a week. I drove past it sometimes and thought about how someone who'd seemed so powerful and untouchable had crumbled so quickly once the truth came out. The legal process moved forward steadily. Rebecca kept me updated, though I made it clear I didn't want any special treatment just because of my job. I was a witness and a victim like everyone else in the neighborhood. Patricia's lawyer tried to negotiate a deal early on, but Rebecca wasn't having it. The evidence was too strong, the victims too numerous, and the amount of money too substantial for a slap on the wrist. Meanwhile, the HOA had to rebuild itself from the ground up. Tom did an amazing job as interim president, but he made it clear he didn't want the position permanently. The man was retired and wanted to stay that way. So we held new elections in late November, about 6 weeks after the arrest. A younger couple who'd lived in the neighborhood for 5 years stepped up to run the board. They brought fresh energy and, more importantly, complete transparency. One of their first acts was to create an online portal where every resident could see financial records in real time. No more secret accounts, no more mystery expenses. Everything out in the open where it belonged. The forensic accountants finished their complete audit in early December. The final number was even worse than the preliminary report. Patricia had stolen approximately $137,000 over 3.5 years. It was hard to wrap your mind around. That was money that should have gone to neighborhood improvements, emergency repairs, community events. Instead, it had funded Patricia's lifestyle while she terrorized the people she was supposed to serve. Christmas that year had a different feel in Maple Ridge Estates. The new board organized a holiday party at the community center, the first real neighborhood gathering in years that wasn't about fear or complaints. I brought cookies and ended up staying for 3 hours, just talking to neighbors and watching kids run around playing games. The elderly couple who'd been my first customers at the garage sale pulled me aside at one point. "We got a letter from the DA's office," the wife told me, her eyes bright. "They said we'll be getting our money back. All $750. We'd written it off as lost, but now—" She got choked up and couldn't finish. Her husband squeezed her hand. "It's not just the money," he said. "It's knowing that what happened to us mattered. That someone actually cared enough to do something about it." That happened a lot over the next few weeks. People stopping me at the grocery store, knocking on my door, sending thank you cards. It was uncomfortable at first. I don't like being treated like a hero. I'd just done what needed to be done. What anyone with my skills and stubbornness would have done in the same situation. But I came to understand that for these people, having someone finally stand up to Patricia had meant everything. January brought Patricia's court date. Rebecca had warned me it probably wouldn't go to trial. The evidence was overwhelming, and Patricia's lawyer knew it. Sure enough, on the morning we were supposed to start jury selection, Patricia took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. In exchange for the guilty plea, the extortion charges were dropped and she avoided the maximum sentence. But the deal still wasn't gentle. 3 years in prison, 5 years probation after release, and full restitution of $137,000 plus interest and court costs. I was in the courtroom when she entered her plea. She looked so different from the woman who'd confronted me at my garage sale 6 months earlier. Smaller somehow, older. She wore a simple gray dress instead of designer clothes. Her hair was pulled back in a plain ponytail. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. The judge asked if she understood what she was pleading guilty to. She said yes. Asked if she'd actually committed these crimes. She hesitated for just a moment, then said yes again. The judge wasn't satisfied with that. "I need you to be clear, Ms. Drummond. Did you collect money from residents of your HOA under false pretenses and keep that money for personal use?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you create fake invoices and billing statements to steal from the HOA's general fund?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you threaten and intimidate residents who questioned your authority or your financial practices?" Patricia's voice broke on this one. "Yes, Your Honor. I did all of those things." The judge sentenced her right there. 3 years in state prison, starting immediately. Patricia's sister, sitting in the back of the courtroom, started crying quietly. I felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was about to lose her sister to prison, and while Patricia deserved the consequences, it was still a tragedy for everyone involved. As the bailiffs led Patricia away in handcuffs, she looked around the courtroom one last time. Her eyes found mine. I expected to see hatred there, or anger, or defiance. But all I saw was resignation and maybe a hint of something that looked like relief. Like she was tired of running, tired of lying, tired of being the person she'd become. After the sentencing, Rebecca and I grabbed coffee at a diner near the courthouse. She stirred cream into her coffee and shook her head. "You know what gets me about cases like this? It always starts small." Patricia probably told herself she was just taking a little extra for her trouble, for all the work she did for the HOA. Maybe she felt entitled to it. But then it gets easier. One fake fine leads to another. Before you know it, you're stealing 6 figures and destroying an entire community. "Do you think she regrets it?" I asked. Rebecca considered this. "Honestly, I think she regrets getting caught. Whether she regrets what she did to all those people?" She shrugged. "I'd like to think so, but I've been doing this job too long to be sure." The restitution process took months to sort out. Patricia had assets, but not enough to cover everything she'd stolen. Her house sold in February, and that money went into a restitution fund. She had some savings, a couple of investment accounts. The court seized all of it. But even liquidating everything, it only added up to about $90,000. The remaining $47,000 plus interest would come out of her prison wages and her income after release. It would take years, maybe more than a decade, for the victims to be fully repaid, but at least it was something. The court appointed an administrator to manage the distribution, making sure the money went to the people who'd been hurt the most first. By March, life in Maple Ridge Estates had settled into a new normal. The new HOA board was functioning smoothly. People were actually attending the monthly meetings now, not out of fear but out of genuine interest in their community. Families who'd been too scared to have garage sales or host parties were finally using their homes the way they wanted to. I became the unofficial neighborhood consultant on HOA matters. Anytime there was a question about procedures or bylaws, someone would knock on my door or call my cell. I didn't mind. It felt good to use my skills to help people in a way that didn't involve crime scenes and court testimony. One Saturday in April, exactly a year after my fateful garage sale, I decided to have another one. This time I wasn't getting rid of moving boxes. I was clearing out the last of the stuff I'd been meaning to donate or sell. But really I wanted to prove a point, that we could have normal neighborhood activities again without fear. I set up my tables in the driveway at 8 in the morning. Within 15 minutes, the elderly couple showed up with donuts and coffee. "Thought you might want some refreshments," the wife said with a warm smile. "And we wanted to be your first customers again." By 9, it had turned into an impromptu block party. Other neighbors set up their own tables, selling their excess stuff. Someone brought a portable speaker and started playing music. Kids rode their bikes up and down the street. The young mother, whose chalk drawings had gotten her fined, brought actual professional grade chalk, and a group of children created an elaborate mural on the community center sidewalk. Nobody worried about complaints or fines. They just enjoyed their Saturday. Tom came by around noon, not to buy anything, just to hang out. We sat in lawn chairs watching the organized chaos of the neighborhood coming alive. "You know what's funny?" he said. "Patricia's whole thing was about maintaining property values and community standards. But the neighborhood is worth more now, both literally and figuratively, than it ever was when she was in charge. Turns out people pay premium prices to live in places where they're not constantly terrified of their HOA president." He was right. 2 houses had sold recently, both for well above asking price. The real estate agents had actually used the HOA reforms as a selling point. New transparent leadership, community-focused policies, neighborhood watch programs that actually built community instead of fostering paranoia. As the afternoon wore on and my second garage sale wound down,